Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Vice President and Director of Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings Institution, Amy Liu.
It's a real honor to be here in Mackinac. So I'm here to talk about how to create inclusive economies in an age of disruption. And the phrase inclusive economies is deliberate. Cities and metropolitan areas are the fundamental units of the economy. And since the beginning of world civilization, cities emerged before nation states as centers of commerce, where merchants gathered to trade goods like silver, silk, spices. And today, cities remain global centers of economic activity and the places where people go to seek opportunity. Without vibrant economies, we know that cities struggle. They struggle to retain workers and industries. They struggle to grow households that support local businesses and to generate sufficient tax base to pay for basic goods and services and infrastructure. So city and metropolitan areas must grow their economies. And to sustain that growth over the long haul, they must be inclusive. Inclusive economies maximize the participation of people, place, and businesses in economic growth. And economic participation means that people are creators. They're creators of opportunity. They create new ideas, services, goods, new enterprises, which in turn means they get the income to be consumers, to rent or buy new homes, and power the economy in a synergistic cycle, and ultimately enabling them to provide a decent quality of life for themselves and their family. Or, as Mayor Nutter likes to say bluntly, people don't want to be poor. So the problem is that, as the recent election reminded us, is that too many members of our community remain excluded from economic prospects. And meanwhile, we live in a disruptive age. The path to economic inclusion will be turbulent as market dynamics are transforming the rules of success. Now, as Michiganders, you know well the impact of economic shocks and the importance of resilience, and you've stepped up. Today, a wave of public-private and philanthropic partnerships are ushering in new possibilities for residents in cities like Detroit, Flint, and Grand Rapids, and even as we heard from Mayor Duggan yesterday. So my hope is to give you a framework and some inspiration for how to build on existing efforts to create inclusive economies in this disruptive age. Now, who is responsible for this agenda? All the actors here play a significant role in shaping the economic fortunes of their city and regions. It's not just the job of employers and economic development professionals, but also leaders in community development, in workforce, in land use, in higher ed. Now, I know that historically, growth players they don't think their mandate is inclusion. And the equity people didn't trust market actors given legacy practices. But if we are to meaningfully achieve inclusive economies, these actors and systems must align, they must coordinate, they must work together, and we are beginning to see that happen in cities. So I will cover 3 points today. First, I want to stress why the collective work to build inclusive economies remains urgent. Second, local efforts must adapt smarter and faster to the market dynamics underway or risk widening disparities. And third, we need to unleash more experimentation in our cities and metro areas to accelerate progress. So let me start with the first point. Why focus on inclusive economies? Now, we at Brookings define inclusive economies as achieving 3 goals: growth, prosperity, and inclusion. Now, economic growth, such as more jobs and expanding output, that matters because growth creates opportunities for people. Wages are more likely to rise, poverty to decline when there is high demand for labor. And we've also added a measure on young firms because there's increasing evidence that business dynamism results in more job openings, improving individuals' chances for better earnings. Now, prosperity occurs from quality growth. quality growth that comes from rising productivity among firms and workers through new innovations or better skills. And the income generated from productivity often leads to higher standards of living for the broader population. But to achieve inclusion, that higher standard of living must raise the employment and the incomes of all segments of the community, closing disparities by race and place. Now let's see how well these trends play out across the 100 largest metro areas. According to Brookings Metro Monitor, all 100 metro areas experienced job growth between 2010 and 2015, reflecting the steady expansion in the broader U.S. economy. Yet a smaller number, 45, experienced improvements in productivity. And one explanation for this is that the bulk of recent job growth may have been occurring in low productivity sectors like retail, hospitality, healthcare. And 53 metro areas experienced improvements in one measure of inclusion, median wages. So in short, the economy is expanding, but the progress on productivity and inclusion remains lackluster. Now, Michigan's metro areas have experienced a similar economic story. Greater Detroit, Grand Rapids, and the Flint-Genesee County area have experienced steady job gains the last 5 years, and that's reversing a decade of consecutive job loss. This is huge. And you see Grand Rapids in the blue line has more jobs today than it did pre-recession. Now, entrepreneurs and young firms, firms which are 5 years old or less, have been positive contributors to this job growth, which is also a stark contrast from the previous 5 years. The concern, however, is that all this job growth is not resulting in greater productivity. In other words, the net income that's being created per job has remained relatively flat since 2000, making it difficult for firms to raise wages or invest in training in new workers. So this may be one reason that the median wages across Detroit, Grand Rapids, and Flint remain lower than they were back in 2000. Now, there's no doubt that the strong job growth recently has helped stem the median wage loss in these markets, as you can see from those lines. But we do need more wage gains. And what's also troubling behind these numbers is that the gap in wages between whites and workers of color remains stark in nearly every market. And finally, greater inclusion must result in improving opportunities by place within metropolitan areas. No child or young adult's life chances should be limited by the neighborhood in which they live. Yet despite economic expansion, Metro Detroit has experienced an increase in the number of high-poverty neighborhoods in the city and the suburbs, as the chart and the map show. So too many families live in neighborhoods that hamper their upward mobility. So the bottom line is that Michigan and its cities have been effective in reinvigorating economic growth post-recession. No question about that. Now the task is to ensure that that growth translates into greater productivity and inclusion. And the absence of doing so will mean that the growth that has been created will be shallow, will be short-lived, because we're ignoring the structural barriers to increasing the potential of more people and firms in our community. Now, not only do we need to embrace inclusive economies, we also need to adapt to the rapidly changing environment around us. Now, embedded in the definition of inclusive economies is resilience. Cities need to have the ability to adapt or bounce back from shocks or disruptions to generate continuous growth, prosperity, and inclusion. And the disruptions are many. New technologies, globalization, urbanization, changing demographics. Thomas Friedman, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, calls this the age of accelerations. Not because these market forces are new, but because they are shifting so rapidly, they're outstripping humanity's ability to respond, creating widespread anxieties about the impact of change on economic security. Now, someone mentioned to me yesterday at the reception that Michigan has too often been victims of these larger forces. So the question is, can we be better prepared this time? Can we get ahead of the curve in a way that does less harm or disruption to our communities? Now, here are some examples of how these dynamics could exacerbate inequality or economic exclusion if we do nothing. Technology is transforming every industry and occupation, and you know this. The manufacturing sector, for instance, is stronger and more productive today thanks to technology adoption. That adoption requires a different workforce, and this chart from a forthcoming Brookings report demonstrates the dramatic demand by employers for workers with digital literacy. In 2004, 1/3 of all jobs, which are shaded there in green, did not require a person to have any computer literacy. Those jobs now have shrunk to just 12% of all jobs. In fact, a full 88% of occupations today require workers with medium to high digital capabilities. Now, while jobs are upskilling, other skills are becoming increasingly obsolete due to robotics and advanced computing. McKinsey recently released a new report that estimates that half of all existing tasks could be automated using today's technologies, particularly middle skill tasks like data processing, data collection, and some routine manual labor. Now, technology has also enabled the creation of global supply chains in which R&D and parts production can take place in far-flung locations, making some US firms vulnerable to expanded global competition. The result is substantial job losses and extended periods of unemployment in workers in trade-vulnerable industries. So on the left is a map of the more than 2 million workers in the past 2 decades who have received federal adjustment assistance as a result of being displaced by trade. These workers live in counties that span the urban, suburban, and rural landscape. I also want to note that I think interesting is this map also looks a lot like the Angus Deaton map of where the opiate crisis has been most felt. Now, on the right, you can see where trade displaced workers in Michigan. Of the more than 150,000 workers who reported job loss due to trade, nearly half of them lived in the Detroit area, and the rest spread throughout the state. Now, while global trade has slowed down, the effects of global competition for sales and production will continue. Now, I just want to mention as an aside that we at Brookings are producing some new analysis that's going to help ground all of these trends in your communities. The goal is to show local and state leaders how these shifts in digital skills, in automation, in trade will impact the occupations and industries in your metropolitan area. So then you can start to think about what these changes mean for economic development, for skills training, for other supports. Now, the workforce we need to prepare for this disruptive period is rapidly diversifying, with those that are 50 years and older being 75% white, and the generation coming in behind them much more diverse. In cities like Los Angeles, Houston, and Atlanta, millennials aged 18 to 35 are already majority people of color, with Detroit falling behind. Our job training, and therefore our job training and our workforce adjustment policies, need to help older white workers and younger, more diverse populations navigate the new rules of the 21st century economy. Now, tech and the benefits of agglomeration are also increasingly concentrated in a few markets, creating greater divergence between cities and metro areas. This slide shows that the bulk of recent jobs in technology has been highly concentrated in select metro areas like San Francisco, New York, and Chicago. Now, while this may not be surprising, what is more stunning is that the 10 metropolitan areas captured more than half of the nation's new tech growth. So basically, the strong are getting stronger. And while Detroit and Grand Rapids, yes, did add some digital tech services jobs during this period, both regions are losing overall market share of such jobs to other cities. Thus, the urbanization story is not just about urban versus rural, but it's also about how older industrial places keep pace with tech-rich centers in this digital era. And finally, Washington can be a disruptive force too. President Trump and the GOP Congress are poised to make some big changes. Now, Trump's budget reflects a desire to devolve greater responsibility to states and local areas. This may come with welcome greater flexibility. It will likely come with less funding, particularly in safety net programs, affordable housing, local revitalization efforts, which means the costs will be passed down to state and local governments, to state and local taxpayers, and to other sources. While there's a great deal of uncertainty that remains about the status of all of these proposals, their one conclusion is clear. The responsibility to grow an inclusive economy will fall squarely on the shoulders of local, regional, state leaders, and their public and private sector partners. So in sum, I think leaders in Michigan have been innovating. You've actually, frankly, been trying to catch up to the rigors of the post-industrial economy. But going forward, leaders must continue to evolve to keep pace with the needs of the future economy. So let me close with how leaders like you can deepen and accelerate existing efforts to create inclusive economies in a disruptive age. Our strategies should help people, places, and firms adapt and prosper. Now, to help people, our strategies should equip them with the education and skills they need to take part in a fast-changing economy. This could include providing our young people with meaningful work experience so they can improve their soft skills and expand their professional networks. This could also include rewarding firms who hire ex-offenders, which is one strategy a recent regional economic development entity is considering. Now, as the land use planners in the room know, place is also crucial to economic activity. Our strategies should connect neighborhoods, core cities, older suburbs to regional opportunities, and themselves be places of economic inclusion. So for instance, as we revitalize downtowns, leaders can also revitalize a network of innovation corridors, neighborhood job centers, economic hubs throughout a city and metro, so residents, no matter where you live, can be close to opportunity. And there is a role for public policy and civic action to spur business dynamism, helping small, mid-sized firms survive and expand through periods of disruption. Rather than simply attract companies, we could create entrepreneurship ecosystems or help existing manufacturers make productivity improvements, which can result in operational cost savings, higher revenues, better wages. Now, against that framework, let me offer a few examples of state and local innovations. And I know there's been great progress and work being done in Michigan, but I just wanted to share some ideas from other local markets. So let's start with people and skills. In New York City, Mayor de Blasio launched Ladders for Leaders, a program to help meet the city's goal to support at least 100,000 jobs, internships, and mentorships per year for young New Yorkers by 2020, with a particular focus on vulnerable youth. With a range of employer partnerships, the city has more than doubled the number of internships for young people, and it has doubled the summer jobs program, especially for youth from shelters and in foster care. In Tennessee, Governor Haslam has also set an ambitious goal that 55% of Tennesseans will have a college degree or certificate by 2025. And so to that end, he launched Tennessee Promise, a free community college tuition program that was recently expanded to include adults, a first in the nation. He has also issued regional skills gap grants to facilitate bottom-up solutions to achieve this goal. Now, for Connecting Place, Chicago is testing some novel approaches to place-based and mobility programs. To connect the regional market to neighborhoods, the city assembled a range of existing regional initiatives, such as food and logistics clusters, procurement, employer-driven skills initiatives, and they're applying all of them to 4 adjacent neighborhoods, formerly black middle-class neighborhoods in the south side of Chicago called Greater Chatham. Now, to ensure that this effort wasn't top-down, the city supported the creation of a new neighborhood intermediary in the community to engage residents and coordinate these activities. Now, Chicago has also been undertaking an effort to work with 10 public housing authorities and the county governments to use housing vouchers to increase the supply of affordable housing in opportunity-rich neighborhoods. And to date, that initiative has created 2,200 affordable apartments, over half of which are located in quality suburbs. And I added Indianapolis because I think it's an example of a region that recognizes this new world of self-financing to promote inclusive economies. In this case, a diverse coalition led by the Indy Chamber involving the Urban League, LISC, and the State Latino Network ran a successful ballot initiative campaign to support the first phase of a regional transit initiative to increase access to opportunity. And finally, to promote firms and business dynamism, there are several noteworthy efforts. Syracuse, Central New York is a small mid-sized metro that has, after decades of job loss, has no single industry strengths. Instead, the various firms in the region got together and they launched a new technology initiative, one called Data to Decision Making, or Remote Data Sensing Capability, which would benefit all of them. And that initiative has now made Central New York a go-to site for drones and unmanned vehicles. Now, Louisville's first build is an example of a large incumbent firm, GE Appliances, that connected with the local entrepreneurship community. GE, with the University of Louisville, created a new lab where engineers work alongside young innovators in the city to co-design the next generation of household appliances. And in Colorado, the governor and legislature passed a series of advanced industry accelerator grants to help the state economy grow and diversify beyond their traditional strengths. And with at least 3 rounds of funding, this program has helped small and mid-sized firms in industries such as bioscience, advanced manufacturing, electronics, energy, to innovate and expand through funds for proof of concept research, early stage capital, infrastructure, and export assistance. And one final thing I want to mention, it's important to try and align a dizzying array of local initiatives around a common set of performance outcomes, and particularly around inclusive economies. Now, the Fund for Our Economic Future, a consortium of national local philanthropies dedicated for transforming Northeast Ohio, they have been working to drive better outcomes among its grantees and stakeholders. Now, the fund is holding the community accountable for traditional measures of growth, which is absolutely important in a weak marketplace like Ohio, but they're also encouraging stakeholders to promote economic opportunity and growth that also supports minority-owned businesses, that generate good-paying jobs, and results in opportunities that are accessible to distressed neighborhoods. So in closing, the forces of disruption, yes, they are macro, but the solutions to economic inclusion, they're local. And it is within cities that separate funding streams and separate programs are knitted together to empower people, place, and businesses. It is within cities that leaders prize problem solving over partisanship. It's where trust and collaboration is built. Now, in an era of great uncertainty, there's one thing that is certain. Cities, with states and their local public-private sector partners, they will lead the way in creating an America that expands opportunity for all. Thank you.